Shalom, shalom, Israel's brother y'all Marion coming back at you with another cold cut. I would love to give all praises to Yahweh, by Hashem, Yahweh Shah, right? And today I wanted to do a Feast of Dedication breakdown. Let's get into it. Let's go over the history of the Feast of Dedication. What is it about, all right? So the Feast of Dedication took place during the time of the Grecian Empire, right? The Grecian Empire, or the Hasmonean dynasty, right? The Hasmonean dynasty starting with Matthias, right? And then his son Judas, right? Eleazar, Jonathan, Simon, right? And then through Simon, you had the bloodline go down, right? Go through, right? Through Simon's son Judas, right? But let's get the history. All right, let's go to First Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 1. And it says, and it happened that after Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Shittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead in the first over Greece, and made many wars and many strongholds, and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth, and went through the ends of the earth, and took spoils of many nations, and so much that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted and his heart was lifted up. Right, so this is going into Alexander the Great, his conquering throughout the known world at the time, right? And it says, and he gathered a mighty stronghold and ruled over countries and nations and kings who became tributaries unto him. And after these things, he fell sick and perceived that he should die, right? Because he was a flaming homosexual, right? It said he had syphilis, right? And wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he yet was alive. So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died. And his servants bear rule over one in every place, right? Because if you know anything about his four generals, right, you got the Seleucid dynasty, right, the Cassander, you had Ptolemy, and you had Lysimachus, right, that ruled over different provinces of what Alexander had conquered at the time, right? And there came, after this death, they all put crowns upon themselves, so that their sons after them for many years. And evils were multiplied on the earth, right? Because when the so-called white man came into power, evils were multiplied on the earth, right? You had bestiality come into play, right? You had massive fornication at every level, right? Pedophilia going on, right? So evils were multiple things that weren't really seen before, the so-called white man ruled. Now you had those things were prevalent now today you may say, oh, well, pedophilia, yeah, I know about that. That wasn't really a big thing before Alexander the Great. Bestiality, all of these different things, man, right? So it says, and there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, right? So Antiochus Epiphanes, right, the son of Antiochus, he was a devil, man, right? And we're going to read about what he did, right? Let's jump down to verse 20, right? Oh, so let me finish verse 10. It says, who had been a hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. Let me jump down to verse 20, right? And after that, Antiochus had smitten Egypt. He returned again in the 143rd year and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude, right? So he came into Jerusalem after he had defeated Egypt. He wanted two provinces, right? He came out of the Seleucid dynasty, right? So he had that province, and he also wanted the province of Ptolemy and defeated Ptolemy, right? So now he had Egypt all the way up to throughout Israel, right? In Syria, right? And then he came up to Israel, and what happened? And entered proudly into the sanctuary, right? So this devil came into our temple, man, proudly, right? No fear, and took away the golden altar and the candlestick of light, right? Well, that's the menorah, and all the vessels thereof, and the table of the showbread, and the pouring vessels, and the vials, and the censers of gold, and the veil, and the crowns, and the golden ornaments that were before the temple, all which he poured off. Right? He took also the silver and the gold and the precious vessel. Also, he took the hidden treasures which he found. So he came in and robbed the Most High. Took all of the things out the temple, man, proudly. Right? Verse 24, and when he had taken all away, he went into his own land, having made a great massacre and spoken very proudly, right? Because the so-called white man is a devil, man. He spoke proudly, lifted up his heart, right? Therefore, there was great mourning in Israel in every place where they were, so that the princes and elders mourned, and virgins and young men were made very feeble, and the beauty of women was changed. Every bridegroom took up lamentation, and she that sat in the marriage chamber was in heaviness, right? So it was a sad day in Israel, man, because he kind of just came in there proudly and took all the things to the Most High, right? Kind of profaned our temple, right? Let's jump down to verse 41, right? Because he kind of did something that America tries to do today, right? And we're going to see what that is. Verse 41. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, right? Like America. America thinks everybody should be one here. Once you come into this melting pot, it doesn't matter what race or what ethnicity you are, we all bleed the same skin. I mean, we all bleed the same blood. Our blood is all red, right? We're all one in America. Verse 42, and everyone should leave his laws, so all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king, right? So, hey, man, he say, leave your laws. I want y'all to leave your law, statutes, and commandments and follow my law, statutes, commandments, right? Yea, also many of the Israelites consented of his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath, right? Because you always want to have coons of our people, right? They profaned the Sabbath willingly, right? And they sacrificed unto idols, right? To devils, man, right? So this is what he was doing, man, right? This is what was going on back then, right? But then you had certain men rise up, right? Read about it. Second Maccabees, chapter 2 and verse 1. In those days arose Mattathias, the son of John, right, the son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Jorib, from Jerusalem, and dwelt in Modin. And he had 5 sons: Johanan called Caius, Simon called Thasi, Judas, who was called Maccabees, right, Eleazar called Avaran, and Jonathan, whose surname was Apis. And when he saw the blasphemies that were committed in Judah and Jerusalem, he said, woe is me, wherefore was I born to see the misery of my people and of the holy city, and to dwell there when it was delivered into the hand of the enemy, in the sanctuary into the hand of the strangers, right? So he was like, yo, he came back, he was like, yo, what's going on, right? Woe is me, I have to see this day the destruction of my people, man, right? Her temple, verse 8, her temple has become as a man without glory. Her glorious vessels are carried away into captivity. Her infants are slain in the streets, and her young men with the sword of the enemy. What nation have not had a part in her kingdom, and gotten of her spoils? All her ornaments are taken away. Of a free woman she has become a bond slave, right? So all nations, man, right? He was saying, he was lamenting, man. All nations had gotten a part of our spoil, man. Right? What nation has not came against her? What nation has not came against Jerusalem, man? Right? And try to defile our sanctuaries, right? So it was a very sad day. He was mourning, man. Right? Verse 12, and behold, our sanctuary, even our beauty and our glory is laid waste, and the Gentiles have profaned it. To what end, therefore, shall we live any longer? Right? Because it's a horrible thing to see something of your history destroyed, right, without honor, right? It's better to die than to see something like that. That's what he's saying, right? Let's jump down to verse, right, 16. And when many of Israel came unto them, Matthias also and his sons came together, then answered the king's officers and said to Matthias, on this wise thou art a ruler and an honorable and a great man in the city, and strengthened with the sons of brethren, right? We know the so-called white man, he speaks deceitfully, right? He speaks deceitfully and tries to persuade you, right? Oh, you are a ruler, right? You're a ruler. You're an honorable man. Come with me. I will make you the king's friend, right? Speaking deceitful words, just trying to use him to get everybody else to sell out, right? And it says, now therefore come thou first and fulfill the king's commandment, like all the heathen have done. Yea, in the men of Judah also, and such as remain at Jerusalem, so shalt thou in thy house be the number of thy king's friend, and thou and thy children shall be honored with silver and gold and many rewards, right? Because a gift destroys the heart, and he knew that. All right, Matthias knew that. He wasn't accepting the king's offer, man. Right, verse 19, the Matthias answered and spake with a loud voice. So he kind of stepped back and spake with a loud voice so everybody can hear his words. Let's see what he said. Though all the nations that are under the king's dominion obey him and fall away every one from the religion of their fathers and give consent to his commandments, yet will I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. God forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not hearken to the king's words to go from our religion either on the right hand or on the left. Right? So he was a mighty man. He stood for the laws of the Most High. right? He said, we're not departing from the laws of our gods. Are you crazy? Right? I don't care what anybody else does. Hey, we gonna serve my house or gonna serve the Lord. Right? Now, when he has left speaking these words, there came out of the Jews in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar, which is at Modin, according to the king's command. And then you had this coon, man. You always got coons. If you don't want that money, I'll do it. Right? He starts shucking and jiving for the damn king's officer, man. Right? Always got a coon, man. So what happened when Matthias seen that? He said when Matthias saw, he was inflamed with zeal, right? And his reins trembled. I mean, he was kind of shaking, man. Neither could he forbear to show his anger according to the judgment, wherefore he ran and slew him on the altar, man. So he instantly killed him, right? It makes you mad when you see somebody, even back then, willingly wanting to break the laws of Most High so easily just to impress another man, right? So that made him angry, man. He was trembling and kind of killed him up on an altar. And what else? Also, the king's commissioner who compelled men to sacrifice, he killed at that time. He also killed the king's commissioner as well. And the altar he pulled down. Thus dealt he zealously for the law of God, like as Phineas did unto Zambri, the son of Salam, right? Numbers 25:6, man. When Phineas put away the plague that was in Israel by killing that man and his Midianites, his wife, right after war. Right, so let's jump down to verse 70. Right, and he died. This is going to Matthias. And he died 40 and 6th year, and his sons buried him in the sepulchre of his fathers at Modin, and all Israel made great lamentation for him. Right, so when Matthias died, right, we're about to see who rose up in his stead. Right, we're about to get into his sons, the valiant acts of his sons. Right, then his son Judas, called Maccabees, rose up in his stead, and all his brethren helped him. And so did all that they held with his father, and they fought with cheerfulness in battle of Israel. Right? So they was fighting for the law, statutes, commandments of the Most High that his father told them to do right before he died on his deathbed. When you finish reading the 2nd chapter, right? And Maccabees, the reason it was called Maccabees because he had it means the hammer, right? Because in war, when he went to war, they say he delivered hammer-like blows, right? Hey, that's a mighty nickname to have of a forefather, man. Right? Imagine saying, oh, yeah, the hammer looking for you. Hey, man, you ain't going to want to stay around. You ain't going to want to stick around. That was our forefathers, man. He was putting people to flight, nations to flight, man, when you get into this book. Right? Verse 3. So he got his people great honor and put on breastplate as a giant and girt his warlike harness about him, and he made battles protecting the host with his sword. And his axe, he was like a lion, and like a lion's whelp roaring for his prey. For he pursued the wicked and sought them out and burnt up those that vexed him, man. Right? So, hey, man, you got to be like our forefathers. This is what they were doing, man. They were putting the heathen to flight. Right? They were putting the heathen to flight. So now, let's get into verse. Let's jump down to verse. Let's go to 1 Maccabees chapter 4, and let's start at verse 35. Now, Antiochus, in this account, he went to Persia because he seen that he was running out of money to give to his officers and to the people of the land. He was going broke, as they say. So he let Lysias, one of his friends, right, one of the king's friends, watch over the province of Seleucia, right, from Syria, right, into Israel. So he had that command to watch over Israel and to make war with us and to actually conquer our land, right? But they couldn't do it, right? Let's read about it. Now, when Lysias saw his army put to flight, right? So, hey, man, he didn't think his army was going to be put to flight by the Maccabees brothers, man. Right? And the manliness of Judah's soldiers and how they were ready either to live or die valiantly, man. That's what our forefathers was on. Ready to live or die valiantly for the laws of God. He went into Antiochia and gathered together a company of strangers, and having made his army greater than it was, he purposed to come again into Judea. So he was like, hold on, y'all put my army to flight. So he went and tried to get more people into his army, right? To come back and try to slay Judas and his brothers, man. Right? But what happened? Verse 36, then Judas and his brethren, behold, our enemies are discomfited, right? Let us go up to cleanse and dedicate the sanctuary. right? Upon this, all the hosts assembled themselves together and went up to Mount Zion. So when Lysias went into another land to get more soldiers, they thought it was a perfect time to, to clean the temple and rededicate the temple, right? Verse 38, and when they saw the sanctuary desolate and the altar profane, and the gates burnt up, and the shrubs growing in the courts as in a forest or in one of the mountains, yea, and the priest's chambers poured down, they rent their clothes and made great lamentation, cast ashes upon their head. Right? So at this time they've been dwelling in the wilderness. So they haven't seen the temple in 2 to 3 years. And when they came back, they see how bad it was profaned. They seen the shrubs and the weeds growing on the in the temple. They seen the gates all burnt up. They seen the things in the priest chambers burnt down. And they was like, yo, what happened? What y'all do to our temple, man? Right? So they mourned. Verse 40, and fell down flat to the ground upon their faces and blew an alarm with the trumpets. A crowd cried towards heaven. Then Judas appointed certain men to fight against those that were in the fortress, right? Because they still had to fight. Remember, Lysias was coming back while they were rededicating the temple, right? Until he had cleansed the sanctuary, right? Let's jump down to verse 52, right? So after we cleansed the temple, right, and build up the temple, right, we ordained the feast of dedication, right? Our forefathers ordained the feast of dedication. Verse 52, now on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is called the month Caslu, in the 148th year, they rose up betimes in the morning and offered sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offering, which they had made. Look at what day the heathen had profaned it. Even in that was it dedicated with songs and cithers and harps and cymbals, man. Then all the people fell on their faces, worshiping and praising the God of heaven who had given them good success. And so they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days and offered burnt offerings with gladness and sacrificed the sacrifice of deliverance and praise. Right. So they sacrificed to the Most High and gave praise to the Most High, man. Right. And they kept the feast of dedication 8 days. Right. Verse 57. They decked also the forefront of the temple with crowns of gold, and with shields in the gates and the chambers they renewed and hanged doors upon them. Thus were there very great gladness among the people, for they that put away, for that the reproach of the heathen was put away. Moreover, Judas and his brethren with the whole congregation of Israel ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year, on the space of 8 days, from the 25th day of the month Caslu, with mirth and gladness. Right, so the feast of dedication has to be kept with mirth and gladness, man, for 8 days. Now we are in captivity, right? But we have to try to keep it to the best of our ability, right? Kind of keep it to the best of our ability, man. Right? Let's get 2nd Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 7. All right, so this is the history of the Feast of Dedication, man. Right? Let's go to the book of 2nd Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 17. Blessed be our God in all things, who have delivered up the ungodly. Therefore, whereas we are now purposed to keep the purification of the temple upon the 25th day of the month Caslu, we thought it necessary to certify you thereof, that you also might keep it as the Feast of Tabernacles. So the way you keep the Feast of Dedication is the same way you'll go into keeping the Feast of Tabernacles. And no, you won't dwell in booths or a tent. It's just talking about the length of the time of the days, and also the first and its last day being a Sabbath. And you got to congregate right on the first and last day. You can congregate all days, but chiefly on the first and last day, since it's a Sabbath, right? So if you want to read about the Feast of Tabernacle, just go back into Leviticus, the 23rd chapter, and it's documented there, right? And it says, we thought it necessary to certify you thereof, that you also might keep it as the Feast of Tabernacles, and of the fire which was given us when Nehemiah offered sacrifice, and when they are built the temple and the altar, right? So you keep it as the Feast of Tabernacles, right? Let's go to 2nd Maccabees chapter 10, right? It's 2nd Maccabees chapter 10 and verse 5. Now upon the same day that the strangers profaned the temple, on the very same day it was cleansed again, even the 25th day of the same month, which is Caslu, right? And they kept it 8 days with gladness, as in the Feast of Tabernacles, remembering that not long before they had held the Feast of Tabernacles, when as they wandered in the mountains and dens like beasts, right? So when they were keeping the Feast of Dedications, they were also remembering the Feast of Tabernacles, right? Because they couldn't keep the Feast of Tabernacles to the best of their ability, right? So the Feast of Dedication was like a makeup, right, for the Feast of Tabernacles. They were still keeping the Feast of Dedication, but they were still remembering the time they kept the Feast of Tabernacles as well, right? And it says, verse 7, therefore they bear branches and fair boughs and palms also, and sang psalms unto him that had given them good success in cleansing his place, right? It was praising the Most High Yahweh Shem Yahushua. Verse 8, they ordained also by a common statute and a decree that every year those days should be kept of the whole nation of the Jews, right? And this is the end of Antiochus called Epiphanies, right? So now we understand that, we got to keep these Feast of Tabernacles 8 days every year, man, right? As in the Feast of Dedication, Slakia, as in the Feast of Tabernacles, right? Let's go to John chapter 10 and verse 22, right? Because Yahushua kept the Feast of Tabernacle, the Feast of Dedication. Right? This is John chapter 10 and verse 22. And it says, and it was Jerusalem, right? The Feast of Dedication, and it was winter. Hey, so Yahushua kept the Feast of Dedication. Now, we know that's not documented in the law of Leviticus 23. But, hey, man, it's something that you got to keep, right? Something that you got to keep. And for you Christians out there to say that the Bible or the Apocrypha is not valid, go back into Leviticus 23 where all the high holy days were ordained by the Most High and see if you can find the Feast of Dedication. You're not going to be able to find it. You need the Apocrypha to get the history of the Feast of Dedication, right? So that just shows that the Apocrypha is valid, right? We need the Apocrypha to understand the Feast of Dedication, right? Because, there's nowhere else in the Bible where it's going to talk about the Feast of Dedication but John 10 and 22 and in the book of the Maccabees, right? So that was a little bit of the history on Antiochus, the Feast of Dedication, right? Try to strip the laws away from our people, right? But the Maccabean revolt, right? The Maccabean revolt, we kind of put that to an end, man, for a long period of time, called the Hasmonean dynasty, man, right? We fought for a long time against the Greeks and different nations that came up against us, right? Because it just wasn't the Greeks that we were fighting. We was also fighting the Philistines, the Ammonites with Timotheus, the captain of the Ammonites, right? Also the Syrians, right? They were all trying to come up against us, man, right? All trying to come up against us to put away our temple and to force us not to keep the laws. But the Most High was with us every time, right? We kind of put them to flight, man, right? So that's just a little bit on the Feast of Dedication, right? Lord willingly, you are edified. Right? I'd like to give our praise to Yahweh by Shem Yahushua, and I'd like to bid a mighty strong shalom.